have questions that you would like, Miss Katie Bailey, she's from our planning group. She'll be monitoring the chat. If you have specific questions, feel free to type those in. If Katie can answer those, she will. If she can't, we will have it on our next monthly planning webinar for the public, which will occur in May. So we'll try to answer those questions for anybody online that may have those questions. So you're recording? Good? Okay.
Excuse me, if you cut the overhead lights and the screen might show up.
Better? Okay. Too dark? Take it all the way down?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. All right, so before we get started, thank you very, very much for coming. Get a little bit nervous when we didn't see a ton of people, but I'm glad we got people here now. I really appreciate you guys coming. It shows that you love the city as much as we do. Majority of the team here is in Jacksonville, St. Johns County. We live here. Our kids are here. We're right there with you. We love the city, and that's why we're doing here, is trying to protect the city from future flooding events. So before I get too far down introducing folks, we had QR code in the back. You can take a picture of that with your phone. It has our study website. All these presentations public website. It's a little bit difficult to navigate with your phone, but there's a Windows function you can use to pull up that website. It's a lot better on a computer. I highly encourage you, make sure you get that QR code. It's on some of the posters too, but that website is your source of information to keep up with the study as we progress. Comment cards, they're in the seats. Please fill out a comment card. We're not doing a formal question and answer 3-minute thing. I want to spend time having our team going through the various neighborhoods. We want to hear from you. I don't want the standard 3-minute remarks. I want to hear from you individually. And what alternatives would you like to see? What kind of flooding are you dealing with? We want to hear directly from you. Meeting's being recorded. I will say that. And am I still good? Okay, good. It just kicked out. All right. So first, let me introduce our team, and then I'm going to turn it over to the National Park Service. So the National Park Service project is completely independent of the Corps project. Okay. They're doing their own flood wall. They're doing their own protection measures from flooding, but we thought it was really important. There's so many things going on with the city. You may hear about this public meeting or this public meeting, but Gordy and his team wanted to give you guys a very quick update of what's going on with the National Park Service for St. Augustine. Then we'll transition to the Corps project. So make sure you remember they're separate, but it's all connected, trying to stop the flooding, okay? With our team, Mr. David Ruderman is first in the back. He's in our public relations group. So he's responsible to coordinate the media, update our social media sites, etc. for the project. Ms. Michelle Vieira, wave Michelle. Michelle is our modeling lead in engineering. She's responsible putting water levels together to see what the conditions look like without a project and with. You'll hear about that. Mr. Marty Durkin. Marty is our planning technical lead. So Marty's responsibility is putting this whole report together and getting it to Congress for authorization. Let me see. I got Miss Sabrina Collins. Sabrina is the head of the VRAP. You saw the posters over here for VRAP, Visual Resource Assessment. What in the world is that? That is, there's some really, really great sites around the city of St. Augustine, view sheds, right? And whatever solutions we come up with, we don't want to alter the view sheds that everybody loves. So Sabrina's job is, as the engineers and everybody in the think tank start coming up with those ideas, it's Sabrina's job to make sure we don't impact your view shed. Okay, so that's what her team is responsible to do. Darren Pecora, Darren wave. Darren is our environmental lead. So he's responsible for writing the entire National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA document, which will most likely be an environmental impact statement, right? That addresses whatever we come up with, are we impacting the environment? Miss Katie LeBeau, Katie works with Darren. She's also on the environmental team, helping to write that document, prepare these meetings. Mr. Dale is our environmental justice coordinator. Environmental justice is very important. We have 2 EJ communities in the project, Oyster Creek. What's that? Yeah, so we have environmental justice communities here. That's very important to the current administration. President Biden put out guidance that we have to focus when we do these alternatives, specifically in the environmental justice community. So that's something close to the core. Venemy is the economics lead. So if you guys really love economics, Venemy will be around to talk to you. If you need somebody to help you put your kids to sleep, he'd be more than happy to help you with that too. Patrick's our engineering technical lead. So Patrick's going to be responsible not only for coming up with the alternatives in the study, but Patrick's will be responsible for designing those and assisting with those in construction. It's going to be a really, really big job. Miss Gotzi, Elizabeth Gotzi, engineering with nature, right? We've all heard there's gray features that we build, which are concrete walls and pump stations and all that. But the big interest now is how can we integrate walls with natural features, right? Maybe you can't, a lot of folks you'll hear, a lot of agencies you'll hear, hey, let's just put in some mangroves, let's put in a wetland. And then when that 15-foot storm surge comes, we'll be safe, right? It's not reality. So we have to figure out how we combine those, right? Can we put in a flood wall, but can we cover that wall with some type of vegetation? Or can we add wetlands or oyster reefs out in front of it, right? How can we combine those efforts to make sure that we're protecting the city? So Elizabeth's on our team. As the engineers come up with those designs, she's going to be ensuring that we have the green, the wetlands, et cetera, included in that project. Ms. Susanna Chauvenet. Susanna is our archaeologist for the project. I think that goes without saying how important that is for the city for what we come up with. Ms. Katie Gwynn. She's my attorney. She keeps me out of trouble. If I have any issues, keeps me out of jail, and that's very important. That's all of our team, right? Rebecca Rutherford in the back. Rebecca is Sabrina's boss, so she's here to make sure she doesn't mess up. And Miss Ashley Fountain in the very back is my boss, so she's here to make sure I don't mess up. I think that's everybody. Miss Jessica Beach now for the city of St. Augustine. Jessica will be presenting a few slides. I think you guys know she's a superhero within St. Augustine, so she'll have a few slides as well. With that said, I want to turn it over to Mr. Gordy Wilson and his team. He's going to provide those slides of what's going on in the national park for the fort. And Mr. Gordy, you can come over and introduce your team with Moffett Nickel if you'd like, while I pull up your slides. All right. Looks like it. And got a clicker.
All right. Our team, Brent Megan, Jackie Browns, they're helping us plan. This is not our whole team, but we don't have as many members as the Corps of Engineers does. But what we wanted to do, and we very much appreciate the Corps of Engineers giving us an opportunity to give you just a couple minutes briefing of what our project is like. There are three things in play here. There's what the Corps of Engineers in conjunction with the city is doing in terms of long-term planning. There's what the Florida Department of Transportation is doing with their seawall downtown, which some of you are probably familiar with. And then there's a little project that the National Park Service is doing here at the Castillo. And can you all see on the way here? Can you see the slides okay? Castillo started construction in 1672. It was completed about 40 years later. But the construction started about 100 years before there was a United States of America. So it's the oldest masonry fort in the continental United States. And its historical significance is pretty substantial. So it was designed to protect the Spanish trade routes and also to protect the area, the community of St. Augustine from attacks from the sea. Now we're trying to protect St. Augustine from attacks from the sea. You get the difference. So this project has been underway for just a few months, and this is really the first public exposure that it's had. So there will be some other public meetings. We'll talk about that. We're doing what we're doing, the same thing that happens when we storms hit. Now it doesn't seem like it takes much of a storm downtown, so we're trying to fix that. Our, part of our wall is one of the lowest points in the city, so that's where a lot of that water comes in, so we're trying to do two things here. Up to a point, so this is to repair these and to heat it so that those walls will continue to hold back the water, or in some cases, they're not even holding back the water now. Why is this a complicated project? Because we have 5 separate and distinct sections of our seawall. Some of them are not very big, but they're all different. They're different construction types, they're different materials, they're different heights. So we all know that if we don't have all the walls at the same height, the water is going to come in somewhere. So as we look at design process, we've got to address the elevation, but we have also got to address 5 different construction types and material types. Now, the National Monument is governed by a lot of guidelines and policies, and so what we try to do is maintain the structural integrity and the integrity of the historic structures, and maintain the visual, or minimize the visual adverse impact of new construction. But if you raise some of these walls 2 or 3 feet, it's going to look different. But the trade-off is we want to stop the flooding, but we don't want to compromise the structural integrity and the visual integrity, because that's why it's a national monument. So with 5 different walls, we have 5 different treatments. So we have 5 different aspects of the compliance process that we have to go through. Our compliance is much like any other federal agency. We make a proposal, we have some alternatives, we present it to the State Historic Preservation Office, which is actually part of the state of Florida, not the federal government. It was made that way so that we make the best decisions, we get a lot of input. So as we go through this process, we're going to look at different treatments for each sections of the wall. So it's not an easy process, but we try to find that sweet spot between protecting the historic integrity and flood control. Objectives, like it was supposed to, ensure that we're protecting the resources, and we want to basically our community as dry as possible. We don't want to be the low point. Project schedule right now, this first star that you see, that's tonight. That's your first glimpse at this project. We will have more public meetings coming up later this summer and into late summer, early fall, and we'll have more design. Just wanted to be part of this process. Thank the board. Back over to you. I'll be over here on the side. If you have questions later, when the other presentations are over, we'll be happy to try and answer.
Let me switch presentations real fast. That was a good overview of the park. Right. Now we move into the core presentation. Again, my name is Jason Hara. I'm the project manager responsible for making sure all the portions of the report. My job is to make sure that all of their concerns are addressed as we move through the study process. This is our second semi-annual workshop. We're doing these every 6 months. We have the planning webinars every month online, but we want to meet face-to-face every 6 months. So this one is in April. Next one will be most likely October timeframe that we'll meet most likely in this same room again. So the purpose of today's presentation, I'm going to tell you in a nutshell. We have now completed a major phase of the study, which is called Future Without Project, right? What happens to the city if we do nothing through the project life, which is 50 years, and that's 2084. So we assume we've constructed the project 2035, and we have 50 years till 2084. What happens if we do nothing at all? Why is that important? We need to know what that looks like from an engineering standpoint. If we have a Dorian or we have a Hurricane Matthew, or God forbid, we have something even bigger than that, or we have a Matthew that's closer to shore. Remember, Matthew was 90 miles offshore and did what it did. So what happens from an engineering perspective with these storms, with sea level rise, if we do nothing? Okay, that is the first step we have to do. Once we get that from an engineering standpoint, then we put money on that, right? Benamy and the economics team says, if you do nothing, here's how much damage, here's how much replacement of vehicles, of goods and stuff inside your house, of TVs and furniture, et cetera. We need to be able to say to Congress first, here's how much money could be impacted in the city if they do nothing, okay? And then we're able to formulate alternatives to come up with to get a good benefit to cost ratio. Congress wants us to say, for every dollar the taxpayer spends that lives in Oklahoma, wherever, that may not come to St. Augustine, we're at least getting $1 return for that investment, okay? So that's what we're going to go through, that future without project. What does it look like? A lot of you are going to say, right, we've lived this, we've took stuff out of our house. We know what it looks like, but we have to verify it and go through the process. We'll do a quick environmental resource update, cultural resource update, very, very key efforts. We have an environmental and cultural team that are working in subcommittees. They're working with all of our local, state, and federal partners from those different areas to make sure that we address and we keep them up to speed as we move through the study process. Visual resources, Sabrina's going to go through a few slides and then she'll be available over here afterwards for questions. And then we're going to talk about alternatives. So as you move through this, I want you guys to keep in mind the colors on the right. We broke this out into 3 areas. Okay, we're doing the entire city, but we break this out for modeling, etc., into 3 essentially land masses that are broken out, right? So purple is Western San Sebastian. Do we have anybody Western San Sebastian? Anybody? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Downtown. All right. A lot of people downtown. Davis Shores. Perfect. So keep in mind, purple, Western San Sebastian, downtown is red, and Davis Shores is blue. Okay. So we're going to talk engineering with that. We're going to talk economics with that. Study authority, and we'll spend a bunch of time. This is on our monthly planning webinar. We're using a study authority from 2000. Congress, in their very infinite wisdom, they were phenomenal. They put a study authority together that says, survey the shores of St. Johns County for damages and provide solutions. We have used this authority to authorize St. Augustine Beach renourishment that's going on right now. We use this for Volano Beach, which is 3 miles that we just finished after the storm. We just used the same authority to justify another 5 miles in Ponte Vedra Beach with dunes and beach renourishment. And we're using the same authority for the St. Augustine Back Bay study. So that one study under that umbrella gave us all of those opportunities to do beaches and flooding in cities. We always have a non-federal sponsor, that's Jessica. The study area. A lot of sponsors will make a decision. Do they want to include the entire city limits of the area, or do they just want to focus strictly on the downtown right now? The city and their staff made the decision, and the right decision. We're not excluding any areas. We're including the entire city limits of St. Augustine. I think that was a wise decision because we're going to come up with alternatives that addresses everything in one report. That's 17 distinct neighborhoods, 3 separate land masses, as I talked about. We are separated by multiple bodies of water. And then we always come up with objectives on the bottom right. And as I said, 2035 is when we have completed construction, theoretically, through 2085 is that 50-year period of analysis, right? We want to manage the risk to coastal flood damages. We want to manage risk to health and life safety. Cultural and natural resources goes without saying in the nation's oldest city. And we want to manage flooding impacts to local economy. When the flooding is bad, the teeny martini, all these restaurants, they're not having visitors, they're not getting revenue. That's a problem, right? If we can eliminate that, then that's great for the city. Study overview real fast. So you remember I said 17 neighborhoods, the entire geographic limits of the city. That's great news, but that requires more time than our typical 3 years to complete a study. As you can imagine, we've got to come up with all really robust study. That requires a study that is 5 years and 9 months, cost of about $7 million, split 50% federal government and 50% city. Everything shown in green in the arrows has been completed. So we've completed our scoping, which was our initial look at the area, developing problems and opportunities. And we have now completed our future without project modeling, where the yellow star is. So that's where we're at right now. Really, really key dates for you in bold. It'll be April of 2027. I know that's a long time. April 27 is when the report will get sent out to the public. These will have all the alternatives for your areas. You'll be able to provide public comments back on those alternatives. We'll have many, many meetings between now and then. And then ultimately at the far right, the three-star general that's the head of the entire Army Corps of Engineers at that time will sign a chief of engineers report saying, I'm good with this. You've met all the environmental requirements. You've addressed the public's concerns. I'm sending this to Congress for authorization for construction. That would be in 2028. This is our website again. If you didn't get a chance to get the QR code, you can grab it here. It's also in the back of the room. As you can see, it's got several tabs in it. We have our monthly meetings, all the agendas. You can pull all that information off. It has tabs at the top for engineering, economics, environmental. As we finish tonight, we're going to start putting stuff on that. Some of these graphs that you'll see, they'll be here so you can download those. But it's a really, really great website. It has all of our updated public meetings that are coming up. So I highly suggest you have that and add it to your favorites on your desktop. Social media, I don't really do it, but a lot of people do. So you got the fancy X, you got the N, and you got the little camera on the bottom. We have all those fancy social medias, and we post all of these meetings on those sites. So if you have the social media, like the Corps of Engineers Facebook page, and you can see right here where we publish this meeting on our Facebook page over and over and over. We're having our meeting tonight in green. That's our face-to-face. Every single month, we have a webinar where we go through the latest information. We are letting the public know where we're at in the study process every single month through 2028, right? We want to keep everybody apprised as we move forward. May 16th, June, July, August, September. You can see these dates. There's a dial-in information that gets posted by Mr. Ruderman on our social media. So I really encourage everybody to call in. They're usually 30, 45 minutes. They'll get longer as we get more into the study, but that gives you information. And as soon as we complete that, we put that on our website, the minutes, the presentation, all that. And then in October, near Halloween, we'll have a big Halloween party. Everybody's got to dress up, and we'll have another discussion of where we're at. Okay. All right, I'll turn it over to Miss Jessica. Your slide.
Thanks, Jason. So this is just a quick reminder. A lot of this material you've already seen before, but in conjunction with the Army Corps' website that they have set up, we also have a landing page that links up all the different resources. So whether you go to the city's website or the Army Corps, you can go get the information for the studies on that too. And also just all the different things that we have going on within the city. We've got a number of projects, and these are two big studies. I starred the ones on this, this kind of like snapshot of time as far as what we've got going on within the city. We did want to emphasize with the studies, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as far as coordination efforts. And so it's a big deal. The National Park Service having funding, starting to design on their part of the seawall. We have the Department of Transportation funding, starting design on their part of the seawall. So we're coordinating between those different agencies. You've got local, state, and federal. We are all trying to talk through the different logistics for our projects to have that. Have just a few studies that I wanted to see more information that comes out. This is for the back bay study, and this is comprehensive statewide. We have a more focused state-funded vulnerability assessment. And that might not be as applicable for a homeowner because we're not looking at houses per se, but we're looking at the city's critical assets. So that's our roads, sanitary sewer lift stations, our water and wastewater treatment plants. It's a method that we're going through at the state level that's state funded that allows us to tap into state funding to actually do more projects to harden and flood-proof our critical assets and infrastructure. So that's running in concurrent with the back bay study. And I had mentioned Department of Transportation and National Park Service kind of coordinating with those efforts. And we also have a regional participation through the Northeast Florida Regional Council. So I help with that coordination efforts for the Resilient First Coast Collaborative. And Vice Mayor Horvath is actually our steering committee chair for that. So I assist her, and then Farah Alami with the Northeast Florida Regional Council. We're actually coordinating between 7 counties as well. So there's a lot happening within our region, which is an exciting time. But again, we wanted to kind of make sure that you guys were kind of plugged into that. That's really specifics of the update.
All right, so hi, everyone. My name is Marty Durkin. I'm the planning technical lead for this coastal storm risk management feasibility study. So I'm going to be going through, some of the work that the team's been doing over about the first year or so now that we're into this study. Specifically, our future without project modeling. So you're going to see FWOP, that we love our acronym. So that's one you're going to be seeing a lot tonight. So that's the future without any project, what that's going to look like. So we got our whole study area here. We're going to be talking about these 3 model areas. And when I say our model areas, and I say a model, that's what we use as our Generation 2 coastal risk model. You don't need to remember that, but basically this is the model that is going to project over a period of analysis through 2085, what kind of storms this area could see and what kind of economic damage those storms can cause. So that's what I'm referring to with our model. And we're specifically going to be talking about the Western San Sebastian area. So that includes Ravenswood, Oyster Creek, and then some other unnamed developments. We've got the downtown peninsula. So that includes Fort Mosaic Gardens, Greater Fullerwood, Melmar Terrace, Magnolia, Uptown, the Spanish Quarter, Flagler, Lincolnville, and Old City South, as well as some of these newer developments to the north. And then on the Davis Shores Peninsula, that's North and South Davis Shores, Lighthouse Points, and then also these developments down here as well. So these are kind of our model areas we'll be referencing as we go through. And the first, I'll just go back to our main acronym, CSRM. That's our Coastal Storm Risk Management Study. So you see that in the title of this study. So I'm going to start out with the C and the S, our coastal storms on these next couple slides. And basically, to model our coastal storms over a period of analysis, we need to develop a set of representative storms, that we could see over our period of analysis. To do that, we know that the flooding you get during a coastal storm, it's mainly that's coming in from the inlet, but also recognizing that, along the San Sebastian River, when that coastal storm is happening, it could be dumping a lot of rain in this whole San Sebastian River basin that's filling up and causing the water to rise over the banks of the river. So we need to account for that rainfall that's happening because it's contributing to the total water level during a coastal storm in certain areas. But basically, so how we came up with this set of representative storms is we looked at coastal storms and the storm surge that they produce. And we looked at 6 different storms ranging from a very small high frequency type of storm to a very large in magnitude but less likely to occur big storm. And then the same, we looked at 6 from small to big storms that could happen from the rainfall perspective. And so that's where we got 36 individual storms that could basically give us a full range of flooding we get from coastal storm surge plus the rain that could be falling at the same time as that storm surge. And basically these points on the map, those are just basically different representative points where we can pull water levels from when we simulate those 36 storms. And basically we pick 2 points. Basically we pick a point that will give us the water levels that are going to represent the flooding happening in the western San Sebastian area and the downtown peninsula, which is more influenced by rainfall. And then we picked a set of storms for the Davis Shores Peninsula, which is more influenced from the surge coming in from the inlet. And basically, we picked the most conservative point to the point with the highest water levels to represent the greater area. This is for our Davis Shores Peninsula. These lines over here, they're called hydrographs. So that's just showing over the time water level for that storm. So these are those 36 storms we talked about from your, more frequent lower magnitude storms to your, extreme storm surge events that could reach up to about 9 feet. And then for the downtown peninsula and the western San Sebastian area, there's a little more, I guess, blended together between those 36 storms, and that's because of the rainfall influence that can be happening at the same time and get a storm surge event. So these are just those 36 storms, again, ranging, from just under 2 feet up to 9.5. So just to point out on the axis, because it's kind of hard to see, you've got a 5 foot right there. That's at about 7 foot to NAVD 88. So that's the North Atlantic vertical datum. So that's just our reference datum that we use. And then a 9 foot storm surge there at the top. So 5 foot water level. That's kind of like what the city experienced during Hurricane Dorian that went by. 7 feet was about what was seen here during Hurricane Matthew, which is the highest water levels in recent history in this area. And then not at 9 feet, which we haven't seen here recently. You can see for the most part, everywhere in the city is getting some kind of flooding at that water level. And so you all know this, the city's been dealing with flooding for a long time, but what we need to do, we need to forecast the flooding that's going to happen into the future, out to 2085. So on this graph here, we're going to show out to 2085 on the bottom axis here. That's not really going to be to scale, and then the water elevation over time, that'll be roughly to scale. And so this is going to show what water levels are being accounted for in our model that will ultimately translate to economic damages. So we start out with just our current mean sea level. Period of analysis, sea level could rise a little less than a foot, but it could rise up to 3 feet in that time frame. And so that's based on these 3 potential sea level rise scenarios. Any of these, we don't have any guidance or science to tell us that any one of these curves is more than the other one. So just got to sea level rise. And then we got our daily tides twice a day. The tides going up and down. So that's all built into our model based on the tide forecast in the St. Augustine station. And basically, this is just showing a 1 month tide forecast for, I think, September coming up this year. So you can see it accounts for fluctuations as well. All built in. So over a period of analysis, we've got this. Before our storms even hit, where kind of our starting water level could be when a storm hits. And then when a storm hits, it could be, up to 9 feet now on top of sea level. Average, one tropical storm per year is kind of what this area has been seeing. You could get years without any, you could get years with 3 of them. So there's also a lot of uncertainty with that. And these storms could hit, on your low sea level trajection at mid tide. They can happen at high tide. They can happen at low tide. So there's all kinds of uncertainty in the future with these storms. But what we could get at some point by the time we get out to 2085, 12 to 15 feet of water into the city. Now that's, the likelihood of that happening is low, but it could happen. And those kind of, scenarios are accounted for. And how the model works is because there's so much uncertainty, we can't just make one forecast and say this is going to happen. So we simulate hundreds of these life cycles, or we call them iterations. So we simulate hundreds of these potential future scenarios. So when we get to our damages, there's going to be a big range of damage you can see, and that's because there's so much uncertainty with this future flooding, like you're seeing here. And just to put into perspective how what we could see in the future compares to, Hurricane Matthews right about here. So there's this whole, range of water levels that, we could see that we haven't, that we need to at least be aware that something like this could. All right, so now we're going to switch from the CS and the CSRM for coastal storms. We talked about that. Now we're going to start talking about the R, the risk. So what's at risk if those coastal storms happen as they happen over the next 50 years? So the first step is to come up with an inventory of all our assets that are at risk. So these maps are basically just showing the distribution of our structures, where we got a little over 8,000 structures throughout the city, with a depreciated replacement value, a little over 3 billion. A little over $1 billion in content value within those structures, for a total of about 5.4 billion. So that's basically the value of assets when we're so structures and their content, and then automobiles or vehicles as well. That's basically out there right now that could get damaged by those future storms. So this is what's at risk. And so when those storms happen in those models, those big blue arrows that are showing, those are going to, for each of these assets that we have, Dinamy Var, who is our economist, put this inventory together so you can ask him specific questions about it. But basically, we've got all these attributes. So the occupancy type, the construction type, because that affects, depending on what type of structure it is and how it's built, that affects how much damage is going to happen when a certain water level stacks up against it. We got a replacement value and first floor elevation. So that's important also for how much flooding occurs. Keep going. All right, so the next slides, we're going to get into the results of how much damage is going to be happening. These numbers you see are going to change over the course of our study, with things like price levels getting updated and stuff like that. But there's a big range associated with them. We don't expect things to change by orders of magnitude or anything like that. But when we run all of our models throughout the whole city, what we're seeing here, we've got results for with low, intermediate, and high sea level rise. And this first line here is basically the average present value damages over looking at 100 different life cycles damages we can see. And then below it is kind of the range. So under the intermediate sea level rise acceleration, on average, we're looking at a little over $4 billion in damage through 2085, or through up till 2085, through 2084. But because of that uncertainty with the storms and that I was talking about and everything like that, the range, it could be a little over 800 million, or it could be all the way up to closer to 11 billion, depending on what kind of storms you get and that sort of thing. And so what this map is showing, this is basically just showing, the darker colors are more damages, basically the breakdown of this 4.1 billion, how that's kind of distributed throughout the city. You can see, 75% of the damages are in the downtown peninsula. That makes sense because that's where, most of the assets are at. But you're also seeing a lot of damages in Davis Shores and some in Western San Sebastian as well. So on the next few slides, we'll dive in a little more to each model area. But this is just kind of showing the overview snapshot for the whole city. And this is just showing, most of the damages are, the actual content of these structures getting damaged at 65%, and then 35% is damage to the structures themselves. All right, so Western San Sebastian, same kind of breakdown at the top. Under intermediate sea level rise, on average, we'll be seeing 225 million in damages. Almost half that damage is to residential structures. And then you got the other half is kind of distributed between your automobiles, public structures. So this is stuff like, this rec center here would be a public structure, churches, schools, places like that. Commercial, you got your, restaurants, auto repair shops, any commercial buildings like that. This is kind of how it's broken down. And then this, it's kind of blurry to see, but basically this is the flood stage that's causing those average present value damages. And so basically what this is showing here, the orange line is the cumulative, but basically most of your damages are getting caused from flooding kind of between the 8 and 10 foot range where most of the damages are being caused from. Those bigger storms up at 12 and 13 feet, they happen less frequently, so they're not causing as much damage on average. But about half your damages are coming from below about 8 feet or so. And this graph here is going to look pretty similar for all three of the model areas. So just go down to the downtown peninsula. On average, an intermediate sea level of 3.1 billion. But you see a pretty big range there from 600 million to 8 billion, and then even bigger range when you factor in sea level rise. Distribution, it's a little more spread out because you have more distribution of structures existing there. So, pretty even split between commercial, public, and residential properties getting damaged. And again, most of your damages happening from the floods between 8 and 10 feet or so there. And then Davis Shores Peninsula, obviously, most of your damages happen in the lower areas, less damage to the stuff that's up a little higher here. On average, through a period of analysis, level rise scenario, a lot more residential structures here. So, where most of your damages here is happening, at between 8 and 10 feet still, where we're seeing most of the damages happen. So that is basically a quick summary of our results from the modeling that we've done. So this, what I just showed, when we get to the management part of coastal storm risk management, that's coming up with solutions. How do we manage this risk? But there's other stuff we need to consider as we go along too, besides just the economic damage. So the next few slides, we'll kind of just talk about some of those other things. So Darren Pecora is our environmental lead back here. So he's kind of making sure we appropriately consider all of the species that he's doing. He's coordinating with the Fish and Wildlife Service, which basically regulates this coastal law, basically federal expenditures in these purple-ish areas here. And so we're, coordinating with the Fish and Wildlife Service, but we're considering that law as we put together alternatives. And then this is a tool that NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, put together, which basically shows how saltwater marsh habitat is going to be retreating with sea level rise in the future. So without, any project or doing anything, a sea level rises, you got about 3,000 acres of, salt marsh throughout the city. And, as water levels rise, that's going to turn into open water and kind of, in a worst case scenario, get back to just the pink layer you see on there. So when we're looking at alternatives, there could be opportunities. We can do things to kind of help preserve the salt marsh as we're also reducing the flood risk. So that's just one thing we're thinking about. Jason mentioned cultural resources throughout the city are huge. And so I'm going to pass it to Zuzana real quick, just to talk quickly about how we're considering the cultural resources and stuff.
It's my responsibility to assess what city. This is a resources includes our historically significant cemeteries, bridges, national landmarks. And ultimately, the goal is to assess the damages, the potential damages, if we don't do anything. And then also to assess the effects that potential project measures may have on natural resources. And this is in compliance with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. What we have here, kind of to that end, what we've been working on is collecting information to see what the baseline is. So collecting information from the Florida Master Site File about known cultural resources within the city, but also pulling from other resources like the St. John County tax appraisal data, with which we will review potential additional structures that could be historically significant. So as we move on with the study, this sort of inventory will help us to better understand how things may be affected in the city.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Donna. And then another thing that Sabrina, who's our landscape architect on our team, is going to be talking about are the visual resources assessment that she's been working on. And this is something that's new to our Army Corps studies. But basically, this is getting at, coming up with a project that will not have impact on how you all
sure that the sources of the St. Augustine area considered throughout the study. To do that, I'm team interdisciplinary, 2 city representatives and 3 Corps of Engineer members. So we can complete the visual resource assessment procedure, the VRAP. The VRAP helps us evaluate the visual and aesthetic qualities that you know and love, so that we can understand how our recommendations could affect how that looks and how you interact with it. It is a 2-part process involving the Management Classification System, or the MCS, and the Visual Impact Assessment, or the VIA. We have just completed the MCS, and all of the steps that we take are on here on screen. But to summarize, the MCS is the baseline of the aesthetic experience that you have, while the VIA is how we evaluate how our alternatives impact that baseline. study area. To do this, team study area is this area down into 10 zones. And from those zones, we extrapolated representative assessment points represented here as the golden stars. To evaluate the area taken in public. Potential effects all are have. Next few slides see on-site views of the assessment points spanning around all of St. Augustine, from Fort Mose to Davis Shores, down into Anastasia State Park. All of these representative assessment points allow us to evaluate the 10 zones, which we call similarity zones. So sorry. They allow us to evaluate the 10 zones or similarity zones that we have chosen. Each assessment point is in at least, there's at least one assessment point in each zone. And as you can see here, sorry. See the criteria that we use to evaluate these. As you can see, there's a wide variety of criteria. They allow us to understand how you experience these areas. They range from water resources to user activity to special considerations. As you can see, under the special considerations, there is a cultural and historic landmark section. This is important, but is not the driving force of the VRAP procedure. The team is looking at all of the criteria, how it is impacting the entire study area to understand the uses and experiences that you have. Other team members, such as Zuzana, are doing specific sites and cultural resources. With this information, we have looked at the classifications that provided by the VRAP manual and found that area top 2, 4 zones, which means project activity should not be readily evident. So really shouldn't notice it while it's there. 6 other zones are in the retention classification. This means that the project activity can be there and you can notice it, but it should not overtake the visual aesthetics of the area. Moving forward, we know that we need to be cognizant of the St. Augustine area and its resources. Our next steps are to perform the VIA with the same team once the final array of alternatives have been chosen to make sure that the visual resources are carefully considered and that we mitigate for any effects that we might have. To do this, I'm asking for your question. Really just want to hear stories and ideas. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so just to recap very quickly, we talked about where we're at in the study process, future without project, right? We talked about what kind of assets are in that area through the 2080s and what could be impacted. You heard the familiar term, B with a billion, right? Billions of dollars of assets and potentially billions of dollars of damages if we do nothing, right? That's in a nutshell where it's at. That doesn't include the damages or impacts to environmental. That doesn't include the damage impacts culturally. We have a lot of different impacts that can occur if we do nothing. So now we want to hear from you, right? We're going to break out here in a few minutes. But these are some of the things I want you to think about. I'm going to go through a series of alternatives, some that have been typically used in a lot of these studies that have been considered in Charleston and Norfolk, New York City, Texas. We're going to go through some of those. And when you break out, we want to hear from you. We like this idea. We don't like this idea. We want to know as we start formulating alternatives for your area, what you like. So think about each alternative. Think about how it could work in your area and address flooding. What other alternatives that you didn't see that you've heard about that you would like us to consider? What are the pros and cons of each alternative, right? A seawall versus a natural nature-based feature. What type of flooding are you most concerned with? And what's your concerns? We call it gray versus green. Gray is concrete walls, green is mangroves, wetlands, etc. This right here just kind of shows how some of these things can work in unison. If you remember, as I told you, a lot of the gray features, the concrete walls, we want to work those in unison with the green features, right? Not necessarily the natural nature-based features by themselves, because as Marty showed you with some of those levels of water, we could see storms here of 12 to 14 feet of surge, right? When you add 3 feet of sea level rise and the Hurricane Matthews, et cetera, that's a wall of water coming into the city. We know the natural nature-based features. Elizabeth will tell you those are not a one-size-fits-all solution to address that. We've got to have gray and we've got to have green to protect the city. So as you can see here, that happens a lot. We have levees and flood walls. But outside of the levees and flood walls, as you get into the water, we have wetlands and mangroves, and we have reefs, right? It's a unison, it's a combination of many different features. On the bottom, similar scenario, we could have breakwaters and groins, which is rock features. We could have a beach and dune system. We could have an estuary that has vegetation. Elizabeth will get into that. We could have a levee flood wall, and then we could have raising of structures as well. Okay. So these are some examples that we want to hear from you as we go through this. So flood walls and levees. On the left, you see nice sunny day, right? This is what you have now. And when the water comes up, as Marty said, of 12 to 14 feet or 9 feet, floods the city. These are a typical kind of flood wall. We call it a T-base, a T-wall, because it's an upside down T. It has the foundation like a house, then it has the vertical wall. So it's a concrete wall. Nice sunny day, water's there, hurricane comes, rises to whatever elevation we designed to, and you can see you're high and dry on the interior of that wall. Okay. But how does that affect the aesthetics and the view shed of the city, right? That's what Sabrina's looking at. Can we impact that view shed? If you're sitting on the bayfront and there's a wall there, how does that impact the city? That's what the BRAP process is. How does that view shed get impacted? Levees could be a sand levee, sand dune type feature, or it could be an earthen levee made out of earth with certain types of vegetation native to the area. As you can see, no levee, major flooding. Put that levee in at whatever height, some of the marsher areas in the city, and you're high and dry. So that's flood walls and levees. Surge barriers and floodgates. These are being considered in Texas, New York City. The Dutch are light years ahead of us. They're doing this everywhere. So this is something that we'll consider as well. St. Augustine Inlet, close your eyes and imagine you have a giant floodgate at St. Augustine Inlet. It's open 363 days a year. We have that major storm event coming. We close the gates and prevent that water from entering the city. Most likely a gate at St. Augustine Inlet by itself is not going to work. It would have to be something on the Matanzas to work in unison to protect that water from coming in multiple areas of the city. These are really great ideas, but they come with a huge operation and maintenance function. You can imagine the city, they're responsible for operation and maintenance of whatever we do, having mechanics, electricians, everybody out monitoring those gates, salt water is heck on metal. You can imagine how much work that would be. But we are considering that. That is something that we're looking at. The problem with this feature real fast is when you have your nor'easters or you have your normal tide cycles or king tides, et cetera, you wouldn't shut these gates for a king tide. You're shutting these for hurricanes. So you would still be impacted from some of that king tide or tidal flooding, even with the gates. So it's not a one size fits all for just the gates. Non-structural elevating structures. I know this is going on in the city now. A lot of folks are taking advantage of this. As you can see here, nice sunny day, houses get flooded. And when you raise them out of that floodplain, you're surrounded by water, but your structure itself is high and dry. So we look at elevating structures, flood proofing, and ring wall. What in the world is a ring wall? In areas where we may not do a very extensive flood wall, you can build basically a small 4 foot, 5 foot concrete ring wall that may surround, let's say, Flagler College, right? It has opening areas with metal sleeves on the sides. Storm is coming, they see the water coming, they take the metal gates, they slide them in the pedestrian walkways, and they have a preventative structure to keep the flooding getting in. When the water goes down, they take the gates up, they put them in the garage and wait for the next storm. So that's a smaller concrete wall. Acquisition and relocation is considered as well. Buying your property out, fair market value, real estate discussion we don't want to get into right now, but that is another alternative. If there's no really amenable solution, can we buy that structure out and relocate that individual to a different area out of the floodplain? It happens a lot in certain areas, especially on the river basins. Now we'll turn it over to Elizabeth. She's going to go through the environmental engineering review.
I mean by natural features are landscape scale project features that provide those engineering functions. And what I mean by engineering functions are those things that were talked about earlier, the reduction in inundation, wave attack, and erosion that these features can provide to reduce that flood risk, but also provide additional economic and environmental as well as social, the things that you love to see, right? But we understand that those are not necessarily things that on their own can reduce those storm risk when you're talking about things like 9 feet of storm surge. But if you integrate them into a system-wide approach, like we found after Hurricane Katrina in 2005 along the Gulf Coast, as well as along the Northeast coast with Hurricane Sally, and what they're finding out with Harvey along the Gulf Coast again, is that you can integrate in multiple features and reduce that storm risk. It also provides a resiliency function to the community. And what I mean by that is that prepare and resist, you integrate them in with those great infrastructure, you're getting ready for that storm. You're going to build these natural features out, or you're going to help maintain those natural features. Keep them where they're at or help them be more efficient if they're naturally degraded now. And then during that storm, these features recover and adapt. Sometimes some of these features can do them on their own. If it's a significant enough hit, they need some man-made help or human help. Females and men out there doing what they can to help that reef or that wetland recover after that storm of that coastal forest. So for your area, just to give some examples, these are not all inclusive, but this is things you see every day when you go out. You enjoy your area, right? You see your beaches and dunes. But again, we talk about that integrated system, right? You have beaches and dunes now, but that does not stop the flooding in and of itself for your city, right? But you have those, a storm comes and you see that, it's a good day, you have a weak deep beach and dune. It doesn't do as well. If you vegetate and you have a nice healthy dune system, it can better resist that storm force. The same thing with your tidal flats. Tidal flats are anything from sand flats that you see out there on low tides, as well as your flood flats when you get up into the more rivery back bay systems, as well as your reefs. So you have offshore, those can be coral reefs, but inshore you have your oyster reefs. We can augment those with things called bioengineered reefs. Those can be like your reef balls, other things that help those other natural systems, clinch onto those and grow over time. And then you have the things like your wetlands and your mangroves and your coastal forest. I don't want to leave out the importance of coastal forest, your maritime forest, as well as your pine savannas. We've learned that on the northern Gulf Coast of the northern Gulf Coast, that those are important features as well when those higher storm surges are coming in. If you have the room and the landscape for this. We're not talking your backyard size. We are talking thousands of acres. So when you're thinking about this tonight and you're looking around your city, where are thousands of acres? Where are football fields level that we can integrate in natural features? They're either existing there today and we can help them, or, you know, to replace what has been lost in the past. With that, I'll turn it back over to Jason to carry you guys into the interactive.
Thank you. Okay, so time for breakout sessions. Real quick, we remember Western San Sebastian, downtown, and Davis. Who's our Western San Sebastian? Do we have anybody? Dale, you're gonna be lonely today. So Western San Sebastian's over here, okay? And who do we have downtown Peninsula? Okay, downtown Peninsula is over here, okay, on this side. Right? Over here. Downtown's over here. We're gonna have those team members that's gonna ask questions, etc. I'll get through in a minute. Davis Shores is in the back corner, okay? All right, so this is what we got. We got stickers that are yellow, red, blue, and green. What we would like you to do is come and meet with our team members. They're assembling now at these locations. If you like a wall, you take a yellow sticker, black marker, write a W for wall, okay? And pinpoint on the map where that would be in your area. If you like a levee, an earthen levee, etc., and Elizabeth showed you, put an L for levee for your particular area and stick it on the map. Red, surge barriers, if you like that on the maps, put S for surge barrier, F for floodgate. We're going to keep this up. Blue, non-structural. If you'd like to see just elevated in your area or relocated or flood-proof, put that in your area. Green, if you like the natural nature base, S is for salt marsh, M mangrove, R reef, and D for dune. Does that make sense? There's markers on the table. The stickers are there. The maps are blown up so you can see your specific area and put that. We're going to use that information as we start coming up with these alternatives for these specific areas. Thumbs up. Everybody understand that? We're going to do that to about 8 o'clock. At this point, we're going to shut down the webinar. Thank you, everybody on the webinar, because I don't really want to carry my laptop around and have you participate somehow.